is gonna run away.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Mike Balkwell. I work for the Small Change Fund, and I'm the campaign director for the Reform Gravel Mining Coalition. Welcome. There's to this All Eyes on Mount Nemo event. I think we have a slide to show about the Zoom etiquette things. We've muted everybody. So we ask you to talk through the chat, and you can ask questions, make comments, and because we're on Zoom, it's hard to have the same connection that we have in person. So please feel free to use those reaction emojis at the bottom of your screen so that you can show what you like, what you don't like, react to what you hear, etc. The Sarah Harmer, who performs Escarpment Blues, which we've adopted as our anthem, will be receiving the Juno Humanitarian Award for her work protecting the environment. And that, just so you know, so you can put it in your calendar, the Juno event will be Sunday night, 8 o'clock on CBC. So if you want to see Sarah get her award and hear her speech, because in her speech, she's going to appreciate all of you for all of the work you do. She's going to tell everybody that the award, she's accepting the award on behalf of herself and all of us, all of you. So that's appointment viewing for Sunday night. Just by way, I'm going to introduce the agenda in a minute, but by way of a little bit of background, RJMC was launched officially in January of 2022. So here we are starting our fourth year. And I think there's been many, many things that we've been able to accomplish, all of us together. The Auditor General came out with a report that was very critical of the management of aggregate mining. They came out with that in the December of 2023. We feel that that happened as a result of all the noise all of us made together to make them focus their attention on it. And while that's an accomplishment, I bring it up because it's also the normal process of the Auditor General to do a follow-up report every 2 years, or 2 years later. So there will be some kind of final report, follow-up report. We'll be connecting with the Auditor General around that. We'll be connecting with you, and let's all keep our eyes out for that. More recently, if you've been a regular person attending these Zoom webinars that we have, you'll know we've been working on a strategy where municipalities can use an interim control bylaw as a way to upgrade their aggregate policies that the Forks of the Credit Preservation Group, they are fighters, worked very hard to get the town of Caledon to adopt an ICBL, to adopt aggregate policies. It was successful. In previous meetings, you've heard some of the highlights of that. And CBM, St. Mary's, the gravel Goliath that wants to build an 800-acre, I shouldn't say build, dig an 800-acre, blast an 800-acre mega quarry in Caledon, appealed that ICBL in its decision to the OLT. That case was heard in September. Forks of the Credit Preservation Group was represented by David Donnelly. The OLT dismissed the appeal as CBM, and there are significant implications of that. And David Donnelly will be speaking about that a little bit later. So it's an example of things we've been able to accomplish. And currently the Poor Burlington is appearing at the Ontario Land Tribunal hearing into the proposed expansion of the Nelson Aggregates quarry on Mount Nemo. That hearing is underway. It's been underway for, I think, 3 weeks now. It will go on for 3 months. And actually, it's the first OLT hearing to happen since RGMC has been formed. So it's an opportunity for us it's a big case. It's going on for a long time. And it's an opportunity for us to bring attention to that in a way that supports CORE Burlington, supports the residents, supports the city of Burlington and the region of Halton, who are also opposing the application. And it's also a way for us to help put the industry on trial and bring broader attention to this industry. So that's the focus and the agenda for tonight. In a moment, I'm going to introduce Gord Pennard from Core Burlington, who's going to talk about the fight to protect Mount Nemo, give an introduction to everybody. And then we're going to have David Donnelly speak about both the implications of the dismissal of the CBM appeal, some aspects of that decision, which are encouraging for all uh, communities who are resisting gravel mining, new gravel mining in their community. And he'll talk about both the implications for Core Nelson and give us, not Core Nelson, Core Burlington, the Nelson appeal, and give us some insight as well into how that OLT is progressing and can progress. We'll have a question and answer period with David. And Judy Smelko, who leads the Saugeen Preservation Society in West Grey County, will talk about what she sees as the implications, the potential implication of both the Caledon decision and the Core Burlington OLT for her community and others. We'll conclude the meeting with some calls to action, ways that you can follow along and be supportive and help um, help Core Burlington resist and oppose the application. I do think I want to say maybe one more thing, which is over the time we've been working, we're now in touch with residents in 20 different communities across Ontario who are opposing new gravel mining applications. The level of support we provide to those groups varies significantly depending on where they are in their situation, where their application's at and what they're doing, and frankly, how much support they need. But it's a growing movement to build for reform of the gravel mining coalition. It's only possible because of all the work we all do together. It's only possible because of the leadership of people who are volunteering their time, lots and lots of their time, to protect the environment and protect the health and safety of their communities. It's very special when we gather together like this. It would be wonderful if we could gather in person, but gathering on Zoom is good and important. Thank you for being here. There's many comments in the chat that I haven't had a chance to look at yet, and I will in just a moment. If you have comments or questions as the meeting progresses, please put them in the chat. And the Q&A will be administered the same way. We'll ask you to put questions in the chat, and I will moderate the discussion with David Donnelly. I always like to ask this question, hands up. Are we at the same meeting? This is the meeting you signed up for, the meeting when you thought you were coming to? Okay. So Gord Pennard is going to tell us that he's been doing this for 5 years, that he retired and then discovered he had a brand new full-time job. He is a marvelous person. He's a dedicated and consistent and highly competent leader in his community. He's a very humble guy, and one of my favorite things to do is make him blush. So I'm hoping it really shows up on the screen because he deserves it, and he deserves all the attention we can give him and all the support we can give him and the other people in his community. I noticed that I can see Janet Turpin on the screen somewhere, and Janet Turpin Myers, she's part of that group. I see Roger Goulet. If I scrolled across, I'd see other people, but I'll let Gord do all the other introductions. That doing a terrific job representing their community. So Gord, now that your blush has calmed down, over to you.
Thank you, Mike. Checks in the mail. Okay, so I'm really happy to be here tonight and to be part of this All Eyes on Mount Nemo campaign. It's tonight we're going to hear a lot about Mount Nemo and Nelson Aggregate and Core Burlington's opposition, but I see this campaign launch as something a little broader than that. I see it as a milestone celebration of the extensive and the collaborative work done by RGMC and its partner organizations to build the technical case against current policies, processes, procedures of the aggregate industry and those who regulate it. It's the case against new applications that are unnecessary and present unreasonable risks. It's the case for a moratorium. a temporary pause on all new quarry applications to allow that reform of the management of aggregate in Ontario. So tonight, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our experience at the Ontario Land Tribunal hearing that began on March the 4th. But before I do that, I thought it would be helpful to give you a little bit of background for those of you who haven't heard it or who have forgotten it. So quickly, Nelson operates a 540-acre below the water table quarry that's been operating since 1953 and rapidly approaching the end of its useful life. In 2004, they made application for an expansion with the community opposition led by Pearl, protecting escarpment rural lands, that was unanimously rejected by the Joint Board in 2012. Joint Board was the equivalent of the OLT at that time. And we thought that this was the end of this bad idea. But in October of 2019, we learned Nelson was submitting a new, substantially similar application for the expansion, despite being told no in 2012. So Core Burlington was formed to carry on the work that was started by Pearl in their fight of phase one. The application has been extensively reviewed by technical experts for Core Burlington, for the City of Burlington, the Region of Halton, the Niagara Escarpment Commission, Conservation Halton, and the Joint Agency Review Team. In parallel, there's been a bunch of advocacy work done with agencies and government officials at both the municipal and provincial level and with the community. And then in August of 2022, Nelson prematurely abandoned the technical review process with the Joint Agency Review Team, and they appealed the application to the Ontario Land Tribunal. About a year later, in June of 2023, the planning consultation with the Ontario Land Tribunal started. It was called the Case Management Conference, the CMC. And then in March of this year, March 4th, the Ontario Land Tribunal hearing began under the oversight of Chairman Brown and Member Politis. Through the last 5.5 years, we've been guided through the process through our legal counsel, David Donnelly, who was also counsel for Pearl in their 2012 victory. So we are extremely lucky to have him as part of our team, and I know he works for many of you on the call. Now you're all caught up, so let's talk a little bit about the hearing. And a long hearing it is. 60 days, 60 hearing days. And that'll go till mid-June, and there's approximately 40 witnesses that are going to be heard in that period. It started with opening remarks from each of the parties, and then Nelson presents their witnesses, each of whom is cross-examined by Core Burlington, by the city, and by the region. And that phase is expected to last until about the end of April. Then the witnesses for Core, the city, and the region are all presenting their case starting in May, and then they're cross-examined by legal counsel from Nelson. Nelson has a chance to call reply witnesses at the end, and then each legal team will make their closing comments, and the hearing wraps up around the middle of June. Now, when will a decision be made? That's the million-dollar question. But what we do know is it's a really complex case, and it is going to take some time to do the analysis and make the decision. So sort of best guess is 3 to 6 months, but we'll only know when we get that decision. So we are 14 days, 14 hearing days into the tribunal and on our 5th witness. And I don't want to jinx it, but I am feeling really encouraged by the progress that we've made so far. As a layperson, I listen to this evidence presented by Nelson and their experts, and sometimes it sounds like a pretty compelling story. But then the lawyers that are representing us and City of Burlington and the region of Halton, who have done an exceptional job of preparing for this hearing and preparing their cross-examination and identifying gaps and issues with the testimony of Nelson, they get up and they ask questions and ultimately challenging the conclusions of each of these witnesses. These lawyers that represent Core and the city and the region are very consistent and aligned in their cross-examination. They're responding to the expert testimony from different perspectives that synergistically demonstrate the deficiencies in the evidence that's being presented. And they're not contradicting each other and they're not repeating each other, but rather they're presenting this very consistent and well-articulated challenge of the work that's been done by Nelson. So some of the highlights to date. Start out with the lawyers were challenging the opening comments by Nelson's legal counsel, who in his opening remarks threatened to shut off the pumps and destroy the ecosystems impacted by that water if the license wasn't granted. But Chairman Brown said he is not going to consider the impacts of not granting the license in his decision. And that issue was removed from the discussion moving forward. Nelson negotiated an after-use agreement with Conservation Halton, all done behind closed doors, didn't include any public consultation, and the version that was shared with the Ontario Land Tribunal was redacted, hiding some key information. Chairman Brown was asked to compel Nelson to produce the unredacted version of the agreement, and he did. Now, at the OLT, anybody who is a witness is required to present evidence that is fair, objective, nonpartisan, and related only to matters that are within their areas of expertise. Well, the cross-examination has effectively challenged the objectivity and independence of two of Nelson's witnesses so far, and highlighting a lack of evidence to support some of the conclusions drawn in the testimony that they made. And with one of the witnesses, it was demonstrated that he was offering opinions that were clearly outside of his expertise. Now, there's a number of technical issues related to karst geology, groundwater modeling, water quality, demand for aggregate, and close to market that have also been effectively tested by our lawyers, and the conclusions of putting the conclusions of the experts into a questionable position. Now, from Core Burlington's perspective, as we enter this final stage of our 5.5-year effort, we are feeling very supported and feel like we're part of a much bigger team, fighting for not only the protection of our community, but also rural communities facing the same threats of new aggregate coming to town. We've seen strong leadership from, provided by the city and the region to protect the residents and the visitors of Halton Region and Burlington. They've mobilized strong legal teams and strong technical experts, publicly objected to the expansion, passed resolutions to improve air quality, and stop overall benefit permits for the development in protected areas. There's the work done by other advocacy groups, many of whom are you folks on the call tonight, and other municipalities who have taken steps to protect their communities. And that information has been shared with Core Burlington and brought new and relevant information to the case against Nelson's application for expansion. The true aggregate resources available, updated municipal standards, and justification for higher air quality standards have all become our evidence at the Ontario Land Tribunal hearing. The experts hired by Core, the city, and the region are of the highest quality. These are some of the smartest people I have ever met, and they have effectively challenged many of the assumptions, the models, and the conclusions presented that in the supporting documents for the expansion of the application. And like the legal team, these people collaborate. They're working together, and they're sharing their information in a very synergistic way. And we couldn't have done this without the support of our community, who have stood with us for 5 years, attending meetings, writing letters, advocating with decision makers, participating in our events, volunteering their time, and donating their funds to pay for the work that needs to get done. And we're no longer just one small, under-resourced community group trying to stand up to the big multinational machine that's the aggregate industry. We're a part of a larger, well-coordinated movement, and we have RGMC to thank for that. They have been the energizing force that brought a bunch of small, independent, local grassroots groups together to align their common issues and raise the profile of the much-needed reform of the aggregate industry. Coming into this hearing, we're feeling well prepared, well supported, and well resourced. And that's thanks to this broader community that we have become a part of. Now, it's a long hearing, and we're only 25% of our way through it, but we're feeling encouraged by how things have been going so far. And we hope that the work we've done and the precedents that will be set in this OLT hearing will support groups like you folks who will be following behind us. And I truly believe that collectively we are becoming a force to be reckoned with in the work to reform the aggregate industry. And with that, I thank you for your time tonight and hand it back over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Gord. People, you can applaud, you can send up flowers, you can send up hearts, whatever you like to do. We're going to switch to David Donnelly in a minute, but I just know if anybody has a question for Gord, they can put it in the chat. And I know that Janet Turpin Myers is saying, damn right, we're forced to be reckoned with. And that's true, Janet, and you're part of the force to be reckoned with. David Donnelly is going to join us now. He's going to turn his camera on. He's the lawyer for Core Burlington. He's the lawyer for several groups here. He's the lawyer for RGMC. I don't, David is a more modest person than it might seem at sometimes. And he's carrying this case for over a 3-month period while continuing to attend to support other groups opposing gravel mining and supporting other clients that he has too. And as Gord said, David Donnelly was the lawyer who represented Pearl in the first fight that they won. And it would not be too much to say that David Donnelly was the difference maker in that OLT hearing. So David, I'm vamping here to get you to turn your camera on. You're off stage. I'm trying to get you to move on stage here. Maybe this is a stunt on your behalf to get me to say more things about you to call you up. I could sing a song if you like, if that'll help get you on stage.
I won't turn my camera on until you call me Canada's greatest environmental lawyer.
So now, folks, here we have Canada's greatest environmental lawyer, David Donnelly.
Thank you very much, Mike. It is a great privilege and honor to address you, the Reform Gravel Mining Coalition, one of my favorite environmental groups of all time. You've asked me tonight to come and provide you with some insights into especially the Core Pearl Nelson Aggregates OLT hearing, but also I think I'd be remiss if I didn't include the Caledon ICBL win, because as I shall hopefully explain successfully, the two go very much hand in glove. First, I want to set the stage by saying that this is the biggest environmental and land use test in Ontario since 2000. In 2000, I was privileged to represent the Save the Rouge Valley System Inc. in the city of Toronto in a case to prevent 12,000 houses going on the pinch point of the Oak Ridges Moraine. After a year-long hearing, that radical environmentalist Mike Harris intervened. He stayed the hearing and he passed the Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Act, which protected 450,000 acres of development land in southern Ontario. As a result of that, Dalton McGuinty created the 1 million acre Greenbelt, which folded in the Niagara Escarpment, the Oak Ridges Moraine, and the Greenbelt lands. I am very confident in saying that if we are going to get, when we get the reform of the long overdue reform of the aggregate industry, it will be a direct result of the efforts of the heroes, Gord Pernard, Roger Goulet, and Sarah Harmer, and it will come about as a result of this case. I feel that strongly about how important this case is in the history of land use in Ontario. Now, having said that, this reform or this case owes a substantial amount to the hard work of the members of the Forum Gravel Mining Coalition, starting with Mike Balkwell, Susan Swale, and Sarah Harmer. I estimate that 50% of Core and Pearl's case has come about as a direct result of the efforts of you and the citizens groups who've gone before Core and Pearl. I give two examples. The Forks of the Credit labored for many years and challenged the aggregate industry, and in some respects the presiding wisdom in the health industry, which has resulted in policies in Caledon calling on the government of Ontario and putting into law in their official plan the World Health Organization standard for ppm 2.5, a carcinogen. That issue has been taken up by the city of Burlington and the region of Halton and Core Pearl in this case. And so that is a clear example of how we are standing on each other's shoulders. The city of Burlington and Core Pearl are challenging the decades-old unsafe blasting conditions and fly rock that are plaguing communities across Ontario. It's been, in my respectful submission, practically a miracle that someone hasn't been killed by fly rock recently in Ontario. This is a very dangerous situation. And thanks to the Romero Legacy Alliance, Tim Lett and his group, Bill Hill, the engineer who sadly passed away, this is now very much a part of our case in Burlington to challenge the industry's neglect of the Turok exclusion model, which in my respectful submission will be a major part of the Burlington case. So having said that, I want to just dive a little bit more deeply into the extraordinary experts that have been called at this hearing, both on our side and the other side. But before doing so, I just want to put the extent of this extraction in some perspective. And these numbers will be somewhat familiar to you because many of you are facing the same challenges in your community. To put this in perspective, Nelson Aggregate is proposing to extract 50 hectares of dolostone limestone from the Niagara Escarpment, which is part of the Greenbelt. It was never disclosed in the evidence, but under cross-examination, their karst expert, Dr. Worthington, allowed that there would be at least 12,500,000 cubic meters of rock extracted from the Greenbelt. That is enough aggregate to fill 5,000 Olympic swimming pools, 50 meters broad, 25 meters wide, 2 meters deep. That's the size of 62 CFL football fields from end zone to end zone and sideline to sideline. If you laid those football fields of extraction on end to end, you would have football fields that would extend from Mount Nemo all the way down to the QEW. The extraction will be approximately 30 meters in depth at its deepest, which is approximately the height of a 10-story building. The 30 million tons that will be taking off Mount Nemo are enough to fill 1,500,000 20-ton aggregate trucks. Those trucks are approximately 10 meters in length. If you line those trucks up from nose to tail, you would have a lineup of trucks from Toronto to Moscow and back to Toronto. Under cross-examination, the karstic expert for Nelson Aggregates testified that the cracks, the caves, the fissures, and the seams in the rock were tight, and that the dispersal of water, particularly to sensitive seeps, springs, wetlands, and of course, the endangered species Jefferson salamander habitat was tight and predictable. Under cross-examination, that expert was challenged to number the cracks and fissures in a cubic meter of limestone, dolostone in this location. The answer came back billions per square meter. Across the whole of the extraction site, that would result in trillions and trillions of caves, cracks, features, and seams. And yet Nelson Aggregate is trying to convince the Ontario Land Tribunal that the dispersal, the recharge, the discharge of water is somehow predictable. Now, this case is notable for the extraordinary experts that have been called by Core Pearl, the region of Halton, and the city of Burlington. For example, Dr. Thurston has been called, who has worked for decades with the Environmental Protection Agency of the United States, Harvard University, and other leading air quality and public health institutions in the United States. It is the position of Dr. Thurston that the only safe level for the emission of PM 2.5, that's the fine particulate matter that comes off the dust that we commonly see in clouds surrounding pits and quarries in Ontario. It will be his evidence that the only safe threshold or level of emissions for PM 2.5 is 0. Now, the region of Halton and the city of Burlington have followed Core and Pearl's lead. They have adopted their position at the hearing that while 0 would be preferable, they have passed a resolution at Council, Halton Region Council, unanimously, that Halton Region and the Ontario Land Tribunal should embrace 5.0 micrograms per cubic meter of air following the 2021 World Health Organization recommended standard. In the province of Ontario today, we are using a very old standard of 8.8 micrograms per cubic meter of air. This is an outdated study and has no business being part of the public health protection regime in Ontario. That matter will be front and square at this tribunal and will be part and parcel of the decision. In other words, public health and safety, particularly with respect to air quality, will be decided in this hearing, and that's why this hearing deserves your support. With respect to blasting, for decades, Ontario and the MNR has been accepting or approving of a process that does not require blasters. Those are the people that actually set the charges, blast the rock, and create the fly rock. Those blasters have not been regulated in Ontario. That fact was exposed in the Ramera Legacy Alliance's case of the Fleming Quarry in Ramera. However, in this case, we are going to be challenging the decades-old assumption that you can skirt the model or the guideline for blasting. For years in Ontario, blasters have relied on what's called the Turok model, which is an Australian formula for calculating the safety exclusion zone for quarries with respect to blasting. The model is very simple. When you calculate the potential throw of fly rock from a blast, you double that safety exclusion zone in terms of the distance to protect facilities like trailers and buildings. You then double it again to protect the public, people and personnel at the quarry. So if, for example, in your initial blast, if they calculate that fly rock has the potential to go 100 meters, you double the safety exclusion zone to 200 meters, and then you double it again to 400 meters. In other words, you cannot blast within 400 meters of a sensitive receptor, being public roadways and houses. For years, the industry in Ontario has ignored this standard, selectively applying it only to calculate the initial blast and ignoring completely the safety exclusion zone. Core, Pearl, and the city of Burlington have now endorsed the position of the actual Turok engineering company in Australia who wrote the model. The city of Burlington is calling an engineer who has spoken directly with his principal who wrote the Turok model. And the evidence that will be in Ontario, we are making a huge mistake in putting people at risk by not applying the model properly. The matter of safe blasting in Ontario is foursquare before this tribunal and will be decided by this decision. This is a primary reason for all of us to support this case. The city of Burlington will be calling Mr. Mark Heaton, who is well known to you if you know the Bell Fountain or Caledon. Mr. Heaton is a retired MNR biologist and is considered to be one of the leading ecologists in Ontario history. with his partner, Mr. Corey Stinson. Mr. Heaton and Mr. Stinson have painstakingly surveyed the Medad Valley, the Jefferson Salamander Ponds, and all the habitats surrounding the proposed Nelson Aggregate extraction. They have produced maps of the regulated Jefferson Salamander protected habitat that has been submitted to the Minister of the Environment. The matter of the protection of the Jefferson Salamander and really Ontario's disposition towards endangered species habitat is foursquare before this tribunal. And the matter of whether this habitat will be protected or an overall benefit permit issued primarily for political reasons, no doubt, will be decided by this hearing and is a primary reason why we should all support this case. Now, for our murderer's row of experts, and there are others, Nelson Aggregate has also called some of the great leading lights in industry to represent their case. For example, in below water table quarries, the modeling of the dispersal, the recharge and the discharge of groundwater is a primary issue, hydrogeology of any case. In this case, Nelson Aggregates has called EarthFX and its principal Dirk Kassenaar to provide evidence to the tribunal that their modeling of the discharge and the recharge and discharge of water will be predictable and that the sensitive environmental features like Jefferson salamander habitat will be protected. I won't get into the cross-examination of Mr. Kassenaar. You should go offline and ask the people who witnessed it. However, the case of the predictability of modeling of recharge and discharge in a karstic environment has been challenged, and that this decision will define whether this modeling is successful or not. And the challenge of that witness and this type of modeling is foursquare before this tribunal and is a primary reason why you should support this case. Last but not least, the Nelson Aggregates called as their expert planner, Mr. Brian Zeman. Mr. Zeman is very well known to the aggregate industry. He has primarily represented industry applicants for decades in Ontario. Mr. Zeman was the 2016 Ontario Stone, Sand and Gravel Association Associate of the Year. He is very much familiar with the industry and its needs. Mr. Zeman testified that the aggregate from the Nelson Aggregate pit is needed and that it is close to market, and that the tribunal should approve this quarry primarily because Halton needs more aggregate. His evidence was challenged under cross-examination, and there will be more evidence coming from Core and Pearl and others that will challenge this assumption. The issue of close to market aggregate is foursquare before this tribunal. It is a primary, this will be decided in this case, whether the Ontario government should continue to blindly approve or recommend these licenses. The challenge of this so-called close to market myth that the RGMC has been so successful in challenging will be written into this decision. This is an important test of this close to market principle. This is a primary reason why we should all support Core and Pearl's case in Nelson Aggregate. Now, I'm very superstitious, and so I won't provide you with any color with respect to what's gone on before, but I do recommend that you tune into the hearing and watch or speak to people who have been witnesses. I will say again that the work of the Reform Gravel Mining Coalition and its members has been absolutely essential in helping Core and Pearl shape its case. Now, to conclude, I want to spend a couple of minutes describing the extraordinary victory of the Forks of the Credit Preservation Group, an RGMC member, has had with respect to its victory with the Interim Control Bylaw, or ICBL. David Sylvester, Deb Wilson, and the executive of the Forks of the Credit have labored for years raising money to hire experts to inform the town of Caledon with respect to the improvements that it needed to its official plan. That official plan was evaluated by Alan Ramsey and Susan Robertson, two planners who were retained by the Forks of the Credit and the RGMC. They did a review of the top aggregate producing municipalities of Ontario and the aggregate policies in the 10 top producing municipalities. they found that Caledon's policies were the worst amongst the TAPMO municipalities. And on that basis, the citizens of Caledon demanded from their elected officials that they pass an ICBL and that they update and improve their official plan amendment. As a result of that ICBL, all aggregate approvals in Caledon were suspended for 2 years. The Forks of the Credit experts launched studies that provided conclusions that were then transmitted or translated into policies. Those policies include protection of wetlands and to put back the complexing of provincially significant wetlands that was taken out of Ontario's provincially significant wetland designation system by Doug Ford, and in what I consider to be an unscrupulous and unscientific decision. The new Caledon policies protect water on site and prohibit the export of water by dewatering from quarries. The new official plan protects trees and has a climate-friendly policy with respect to the protection of significant woodland, dramatically reducing the amount of woodland necessary to be considered important and protected. Most importantly, the town of Caledon now has an official plan policy that says for all future aggregate extraction, new producers must keep their emissions of PM 2.5 below the World Health Organization standard of 5.0 micrograms per cubic meter of air, which is well below Ontario's standard of 8.8 micrograms. This was a considerable public policy and land use planning victory in Ontario. But that ICBL, which put in place those policies, was challenged by CBM or Cementos and Votorodum, a multinational corporation. They took the town of Caledon to the Ontario Land Tribunal and challenged the ICBL. There was a hearing in October, and the town did an excellent job of representing the residents, but it was the Forks of the Credit, in my respectful submission, that provided the real gist or the real evidence that won that case. I'm going to read to you now some select parts of the decision with respect to how this case was decided. And again, I believe that the RGMC and in particular Forks of Credit have covered themselves in glory with respect to this important public policy victory. The first is regarding the Forks of the Credit's analysis of Caledon's policies. The tribunal wrote, moreover, the tribunal was persuaded that studies, including the TAPMO policy report provided by the Forks of the Credit, raised concerns about Caledon's policies being amongst the weakest in Ontario, highlighting a need for reform. CBM challenged the bona fides of the ICBL. This is what we hear across Ontario, is that ICBLs can't succeed because the aggregate producers will sue or win at the OLT, challenging the motives of municipalities for passing ICBLs. The tribunal wrote in response to CBM's accusation that council was improperly motivated. The tribunal wrote, regardless, the evidence presented did not demonstrate that the appellant, being CBM, was unfairly targeted by the town or that the ICBL was improperly motivated. The evidence supported the tribunal's finding that the town, in response to various development pressures and information regarding gaps in policy, enacted the ICBL to study whether that was the case and update its policies if necessary. This is a legitimate planning rationale for an ICBL. We won on every count with respect to the motivation and the legitimacy of the ICBL. Now, in somewhat of a surprise, CBM made a substantial issue of whether the ICBL interfered with the provincial policy directive to create as much aggregate as possible close to market. The Forks of the Credit challenged in both their cross-examination and direct evidence this long-held myth by industry. I will now quote from the tribunal's decision when it considered this matter. The appellant, being CBM, argued that the ICBL limits the economic well-being of the province and the GTA because, as CBM's planner testified, and that's that was a woman associated with OSCA testified, aggregate reserves that are quote unquote close to market are critically low. However, the tribunal was not persuaded by this, Rather, the tribunal was persuaded by forks of the credit submissions and evidence, including data provided, that there appears to be an ample supply of aggregate resources, with at least 13.44 million tons available annually, contradicting the appellant's concerns about economic harm and aggregate shortages. The appellant did not demonstrate a negative impact by the ICBL on the province's GDP or the GTA's economic figures. And I'll quote here, which was so laughably brought to the tribunal as evidence. And again, I'm quoting, moreover, no interventions from regulatory bodies such as the Ministry of Natural Resources has been necessary. There was a further key finding, which is to say it is perfectly legitimate for residents to apply the official plan policies that point out why your municipalities are so special or spectacular, or why the unique character of your community should be preserved from rampant aggregate extraction, which is plaguing places like ACW, which the Friends of Balls Bridge and Little Lakes have been fighting against for years. The tribunal wrote in response to CBM's evidence that there was no need to consider the unique character of Caledon in its decision. I quote, "The tribunal was also persuaded by Forks Council's submission that the ICBL supports the town's goal, as outlined in the town's OP, to preserve its unique character while managing aggregate resources responsibly. The ICBL's purpose, to study the town's aggregate policies, supports this goal and the position that planning decisions should balance growth with environmental and community considerations. The town's policies aim to balance extraction with community and ecological interests, and the ICBL supports that aim." Finally, the tribunal held the appellants that CBM's concerns about aggregate shortages, economic harm, and restrictive policies are speculative and unsupported by evidence. The ICBL does not undermine aggregate production, and Caledon's planning approach remains consistent with broader municipal and provincial goals. In other words, this was a grand slam for the environment, land use planning, and all of us. I take my hat off to the folks of the Credit Preservation Group for creating such a wonderful precedent for us all. Now, this ICBL decision is a precursor, or it's a taste of things to come. If we don't get behind Core and Pearl at this extraordinarily critical moment in the evolution of the Reformed Gravel Mining Coalition, we could lose the case. And if we lose the case, all of this good work is going to be for naught, and we will have to start over again climbing that mountain. And so if there's one thing I can recommend to you, it's to thank the folks of the Credit Preservation Group for winning this important ICBL decision, but it's to take that gratitude and pour it into Core and Pearl. Right now, they are fighting your fight. If we win this case, reform of the gravel mining industry will happen. If we lose this case, that will be very much undecided, and we will have a far longer and harder road to travel. And so with that, I say thank you to Gord Pernard, to Roger Goulet, and to Sarah Harmer for putting your backs into this case. We meet every single day for hours trying to fight for your environment. I owe them a debt of gratitude as a citizen of Ontario, as I owe all of you a debt of gratitude for being part of this movement. Thank you very much. Those are my submissions.
Thank you, David Donnelly. I hope you can hear the applause.
I can't.
Well, just stretch those ears out a little. And I hear you being superstitious. I hear you being superstitious and being measured in your tone about how you talk about this. And I hope that the measuredness of your tone doesn't minimize the value of what you're doing. And folks, David's being very measured now. If you haven't had a chance to turn into the OLT, we encourage you to do that under calls to action. We'll be doing that later and providing you the information on how to do that. But it's been a masterclass to watch David in cross-examination dismantle the experts for Nelson Aggregate. David, we're going to see about some questions. A question right off the top from Harry Jongerden, who's fighting a quarry application out his way. When I mentioned earlier in my comments that Core was fighting again the fight that Pearl fought successfully several years ago when the then OMB said no to this quarry expansion, Harry says, It seems like double jeopardy. How is it that the applicant gets to return and relitigate a case that they lost? You're muted, David.
So unlike so many other areas of law, both criminal and civil, there is no res judicata or double jeopardy in land use planning where there probably should be. It was a mistake of the Niagara Escarpment Commission to not redesignate the plateau when they had the opportunity after the last victory. It was a mistake on the part of the city of Burlington and the region of Halton not to push harder for that redesignation. And ultimately, it was a mistake of all of us for electing a government that didn't see the wisdom in passing an MZO to protect the Mount Nemo Plateau. You know, there have been hundreds of MZOs passed to facilitate development, sometimes in very poor locations. But ultimately, the reform of aggregate mining has to come with something that was included in the green gravel standard that Sarah and I wrote, oh gosh, probably 20 years ago, which kicked off the whole reform gravel mining campaign. And that was that there is a time limit on extraction in communities. We thought that the fairest time limit was 20 or 25 years. No more extensions, no more excuses, no more dribbling out, dragging out extraction. You're in and you're out in 20 or 25 years. It's called social equity or fairness. And when the reform of the aggregate industry happens, which it will, because we're going to win, that should probably be item number one on the reform list, which is communities can only take this stuff for so long, and we need to time limit it. And there can't be any of these do-overs with respect to putting these communities through these interminable fights.
David, there's a question from Mary Vanderwood, and Mary, thanks for joining us again. I'm always happy to see you here. Mary's question is, why would the Conservation Authority make a behind-the-scenes remediation deal? Curious, have they no environmental teeth anymore?
Well, that land conveyance agreement is one of the most shocking things that I've ever heard come out of a conservation authority. In secret, they negotiated with Nelson Aggregate and agreed that at the end of approximately the 29-year or 30-year lifespan of the quarry, that Nelson Aggregate could hand over the site for perpetual pumping, maintenance, some more rehabilitation. The agreement was redacted. In other words, it was kept confidential. And then Nelson Aggregate submitted it as evidence saying, look, don't worry about the quarry when we're done. We're going to give it to Conservation Halton, and we're giving them money to make sure that they can afford to maintain it. So there'll be no problem, no burden to the taxpayer. But that was kept secret. Cora Pearl instructed its lawyer to demand the disclosure of this evidence. The submission of that land conveyance agreement in a redacted form, in other words, with secret parts, was contrary to the rules of procedure of the OLT. We demanded it be disclosed. The OLT, in a landmark or good decision, ordered the disclosure of this document. In it, it says that Nelson Aggregates is only required to pay the Conservation Authority 4 cents per ton extraction to pay for the perpetual pumping. That's pumping in perpetuity and maintenance, monitoring, the whole thing. So we are not sure. 4 cents might be the right rate for maintaining this thing in perpetuity. That 4 cents is not indexed to inflation. In other words, they're gambling that the 4 cents that they collect for the next 30 years is going to stand up for all eternity. That seems highly unlikely. My brother-in-law taught actuarial science. I know enough about this to be dangerous. It's highly unlikely that 4 cents a ton is the right number. However, we are going to be asking Conservation Authority for its due diligence, because if they had an actuarial, they had an investment counselor, they had an engineer who would do a proper estimate of the cost, and they can demonstrate their work. In other words, they can prove to us that that is the right amount to make sure this thing wins, then we'll leave the point alone. If, on the other hand, they did not do their due diligence and they simply accepted Nelson and its work, and Nelson at its work, then we have a very serious problem with the governance of that Conservation Authority.
David, there's a related question from Kate Hepworth. Kate's a very active resident in Caledon on many issues, particularly been active around traffic, I think, and she's asked many questions in the chat. And Kate, we're very glad you're with us here tonight. And in a related question, Kate's asking, what has the Niagara Escarpment Commission said about Mount Nemo, if anything, to this point?
They've said that it should be extracted for aggregate. They have recommended the quarry. They have, in my respectful submission, abandoned the principles of the Niagara Escarpment plan. Doug Ford has put commissioners on the commission, including an industry representative. The Niagara Escarpment Commission has abandoned the protection of the Niagara Escarpment. They are no longer a party to this hearing. They withdrew, which is contrary to the position of the Niagara Escarpment last time around. And this application is worse, and nothing has changed in the plan that would suggest that the commission should be supporting it. So I ask you where the decision came from.
Well, David Donnelly, I always like to say I'm not a lawyer in public, and yet I want to play at it, and I want to lead the witness and say, what do you think is the reason that the Niagara Escarpment Commission has abandoned its conservation principles? Would you have a theory?
Well, first and foremost, it has the Escarpment Commission has gone through some very significant staff turnover, and that the people that they have working there now are not very experienced. I'm not saying anything one way or another, but they have lost a substantial amount of experience and expertise. I also think that land use planning under the Ford government has been politicized, and that this decision, while I don't know whether this was a political decision or not, it doesn't align or is not consistent with the previous decision of the Niagara Escarpment Commission. And given the fact that Halton Region and the city of Burlington are very much opposed to this application, and they are the constituent members of the Niagara Escarpment Commission. Remember, the Niagara Escarpment Commission is comprised primarily of elected officials, and the elected officials from Halton and Burlington are saying, we don't want this quarry. So how the commission populated by people from elsewhere could decide what's best for the people of Halton and Burlington, I would query that. That doesn't make sense to me.
As part of the work that we've all been doing together, municipal councilors and why am I having trouble saying this? Municipal councilors in many jurisdictions are paying more attention and are asking us questions and are checking into webinars like this. And I'm very pleased that Councillor Welburn from Algoma Mills, Township of the North Shore, is on our call tonight. And he has a comment and a question. And David, it says, as a councillor that is very green when it comes to these matters, what is something that I can take back to my fellow councillors that you feel is lacking from council when it comes to groups such as yourselves or others? Thanks for the information tonight. I've learned new things in the matter at hand.
So, well, I would do a very cursory review of your official plan. I would inquire in terms of what support there is for protecting the public from aggregate extraction, and then I would rally support on council for an ICBL, and I would commission, with the support, a partnership with local residents in the Reform Gravel Mining Coalition, and I would then produce official plan policies that protect the environment and your residents. So it's not a simple thing to do, but you have the precedent from Caledon. It should be much easier to pull off. And you've got some heroes up in that township that fought, I can't remember the name of the quarry, but you've got people up there who are members of the Reform Gravel Mining Coalition, and they are already resourced. These are tigers up there. These are tireless volunteers. I would take advantage of their expertise and their cooperation with the Reform Gravel Mining Coalition. And within a year or two, you could become a leader in Ontario with respect to protecting the public and the environment.
And I don't know, speaking of tigers, I don't know if she's on the call or not. Maybe somebody else can tell us, but Rhonda Kirby from the North Shore has been up there working for years against the Rankin quarry proposal and protecting the blending turtle habitat. So Councillor
Rhonda is a hero. Rhonda is a tireless advocate for her community. I work with Rhonda. She's amazing.
So she's just made a comment in the chat, Dairying Aggregates, and maybe Councillor Welburn, you and Rhonda know each other, and if not, you should. Now, thank you very much, David. Thank you for your presentations. Thank you for your advocacy. Thank you for answering the questions. Thank you for being with us late at night when you're busy all day. Judy Smelko from the Saugeen Preservation Society, and I think this is, I'm not sure exactly what Judy's going to say, but I think your last question, Councillor, is a good segue because Judy can tell us about how she has melted the cold hearts of the councillors in West Grey and made them into be allies. So Judy, thank you for being with us and for building on our comments and helping us understand how the work of what's happening in the OLT and Core Burlington is important to you and people in other communities.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mike. So I knew what I was going to say about an hour ago when this started, and then the gentleman covered a whole lot of things that I was going to talk about. So bear with me as I go through this. I'm going to be meandering a little, I'm sure. So like Mike said, I am up in West Grey. I'm the president of the Saugeen Preservation Society, and we were formed 2 years ago when the first aggregate application showed up in our neighborhood on the banks of the Saugeen River in a very unsuitable location for a gravel pit. And as we started digging in, by June of that year, we were up to 2 new applications. We're dealing with 2 different companies, and the existing pit that's about 1 kilometer up the road is looking to expand. So we've got it all on our plate right now. So watching Forks of the Credit and Gord Pennard at Core, we learn a lot from these guys. And I would like to start by giving them all a shout out. But like I said, both have a huge impact on our fight. Both Forks of the Credit, Core, and Pearl have invested incredible number of volunteer man hours and money to manage these fights. They've dealt with the applicants, numerous agencies that are involved, local and provincial government, hired their own experts, raised money, raised awareness, all to support their fight. And it is a huge undertaking that they have done. And it's amazing to start seeing these things pay off for them. So I'm going to start with Caledon and Forks of the Credit decision. So, like I said, we're fighting 3 different applications, and like Forks of the Credit did, we assessed our local policies, and we found that our local policies were based on a 2003 study, and they're outdated. A big thing is constraint mapping. It does not reflect the current composition of our municipality. And we have a great amount of aggregates here in West Grey, but we're not close to the market as Core is and as Caledon is. They're all very close to the big city centers where we're up in cottage country. But we are bound by the same rules, and if an aggregate license is put forward, an aggregate pit happens. So we are following in Caledon's footsteps. We've delegated to our council and asked them to use an ICBL to update our local policies. We used Caledon as an example, and we were happy to find that our council is currently doing a staff report to look at their options going forward. So we're just right at the beginning of the process, and we were following Caledon's the OLT for Caledon's ICBL because we needed to see it be upheld, and it was. And so that translates into our fight in a big way. We can go back to our council and say, you know what? We're in the same situation as Caledon was. You're outdated and you have applications on your desks. And the OLT has ruled that it is well within your responsibilities as a municipality to update these policies and protect your municipality's best interest and residents' best interest. So that's a huge win for us. We are so grateful for the work that Forks of the Credit did on that win. Like I said, there's so much that goes into these. So let's talk about the OLT hearing. As I tucked in and started watching the hearing, I was prepared for something dry and technical. And I'm not going to say that none of it is dry and technical, but I've read OLT rulings and transcripts. They're definitely dry, but it didn't prepare me for watching in real time. There's a lot that happens at these hearings that will shock you, will make you happy. Watching David in action, he's also our lawyer, is inspiring. He's amazing to watch. I dare say he's made me cheer a few times and laugh more than once. So I have to admit, it's become my guilty pleasure. I've been watching every day. I've booed and been angry. I've cheered and been happy. I've wanted to yell, "Answer the damn question" at the screen, watching them go through this with the experts. And as somebody who's in the middle of this fight, I've already learned a lot. There's a lot of differences and parallels between their specific fight and ours. They're a quarry, we're a pit. They're fighting one applicant, we're fighting three. They're close to a major city center and we're up in cottage country. There's different specifics like in hydrogeology, but hydrogeology in general is a big deal. In their case, it's Mount Nemo. In the escarpment, and here we're dealing with the Saugeen River. But there's many parallels across all of our fights. There's endangered species, noise, dust, and one that really falls through the crack a lot is the socioeconomic impact of these pits on residents. So planning is really important, and that's something and it'll be very palatable. Whereas if you watch about hydrogeology, but when you listen to planning, it is very palatable to all of the laymen. So the industry likes to call us NIMBYs, and this kind of ties in with the planning part. Not in my backyard. And the MNRF identifies us as sensitive receptors. I think both of those are very telling. Everything is built around us, sucking it up and cowing down in the name of the straw house that they've built on the greater good and maintaining the status quo. I've heard along the way, though, that NIMBY also stands for next might be you. And that's what makes it important for people to watch this hearing and see exactly skirts around these issues, not approach it in a unbiased manner. They definitely look out for their clients' best interests along the way. So what have we gained so far? We're gaining insight first and foremost. Sadly, as I just mentioned, we realized early in our fight that experts in support of the industry are not impartial. And that's what seems to be playing out at the OLT. There is definitely a lot of things that are skimmed over or virtually ignored that don't support their application and data to support them. They cherry pick topics that they can prove out or defend and avoid topics and issues that can be argued against. But it is amazing to watch David and the other lawyers hold their feet to the fire because they are absolutely doing that. Watching in real time, we can learn as group fighting, and earlier in the process, we can learn a lot about the OLT before we land there because all of us land there. This is the first hearing to happen since we started this fight. And like I mentioned earlier, I've looked into other rulings and read the transcripts, but they don't measure up to watching and listening while it happens. There are many nuances that are missed just reading. You miss body language, you miss tone, and both are very telling. You can pick up a lot watching versus reading. And on the upside, I've found different avenues to go down to support our fight and resources and data that it's also available. So who else is watching? Not only the concerned citizens watching, but the industry is watching. And if they are watching, there's a reason. So this, again, translates into we need to watch. We need to have a presence in that list of people that are watching. There'll be many opportunities for everyone to tune in and learn. As Gord said, this is going on until June. It's early on, so at this point, we're hearing from Nelson's experts arguing their case. But as I mentioned, you don't need to be an expert to understand, for example, the attempted justification of a bad planning decision and the wanton disregard for residents and their homes that will be impacted. Ultimately, this ruling will come within a new landscape that is forming around gravel mining because of our GMC pulling us together, like Gore said. These fights are becoming more and more known to the public. More people are catching on and learning that the scales have been tipped in favor of the industry for way too long. It's time for change, and change is happening. There have been a lot of progress in the fight, like the OLT ruling for Caledon's ICBL, the Auditor General's report, the supply study, press coverage, and broader interest in the fights that we're all forging here. All of these are exciting steps forward and hopefully will have an impact on the hearing and have increased the justification to start finally tipping the scales to a more balanced position. It can no longer be gravel at all costs. The costs, environmental and socioeconomically, are too high. There is no reason to approve a gravel mining application just because an application was made, which has been the norm for too long. We're watching with great interest, learning a lot to apply to our fight and also the broader fight. And we will wait with bated breath for the ruling in hopes that the ruling reflects the balanced interests instead of the status quo of gravel extraction being prioritized above all else. So I'll finish up by saying the industry is watching and we need to watch also. I'm excited that we all get to follow along and that our GMC is going to let us all know when the important universal issues are being discussed. And please tune in at those times. It's so important that this no longer flies under the radar and that people are aware of exactly what's happening in an industry that can show up in your neighborhood next if it hasn't already.
Thank you, Judy. And thank you for encouraging people to take these calls of action. And thank you for your leadership. There's a question for you, Judy. It says, if appropriate, can you speak a bit about the importance of being able to talk to your counselors directly, just not just through short delegation, formal delegations to council, but I think you're having one-on-one conversations with them. And tell us about that and why it's important.
Absolutely. So we came at it a little bit of a weird way. I know that when Forks of the Credit went through this, they were really in their council's ears prior, and they got a lot of engagement. Now, that doesn't mean that they were always on board with them, or everything went tickety-boo after that. But we struggled for 2 years to get into our counselors' ears. And we finally got to a point where it was push come to shove. These applications were almost due to be on their desks. They could be there any day. And we didn't want them to be considered under the old plan. So we bit the bullet and we delegated first. We had one counselor on side. One counselor was talking to us, and he was willing to step up for us in that moment. And I don't think we could have done it without him stepping up for us in that moment and requesting the staff report. And since then, we have other counselors that are plugging in. If you don't talk to them, it's such a complicated issue. I mean, I cannot express enough how many moving parts come with gravel mining. There's environmental considerations, there's socioeconomic considerations, there's the consideration of the intent of the municipality and their core ruling. You know, we are the backyard up here. We're where everybody comes up to play. And so we're based in tourism. So a lot of our consideration has to evolve around that. So there's so many moving parts. You have to sit down with them and talk and go through it with them so that they have a better understanding of what's at stake. And the industry is in their ears on the other side. So if the industry is in their ear and telling them they need it, we need to be in the other ear and giving them that balance and giving them the jumping off point to be able to effectively discuss these things. Can't hear you, Mike.
Yep, sorry. Thanks, Judy. And Kate's comment in the chat connects exactly what you're saying, which is that without getting into it now, there'll be a municipal election in 18 months. And now is the time to be getting in the ears of people who want to run for council in order to protect the community against things like gravel mining and have them go into council with knowledge, not be new councillors who have to get educated for the first time on these issues. Thank you,
Absolutely.
Judy. Thank you, Judy, again for all that you do. Folks, we're near the end of the meeting. We've got some calls to action, and you've been hearing, and there's a calls to action slide coming, and you've been hearing that it's important to check into the hearing now. We've been circulating, Core's been circulating, other groups are circulating the information for how you can log in. Now, first of all, it's really important, these hearings, since the pandemic, these hearings now are only virtually, they used to be in person. And it makes a difference for them to see that there are people watching. It makes everybody be more accountable to what's happening. And if you are not able to watch, but you're able to log in and go about your business during the day and have a look now and then, that will help increase the profile and presence of the all eyes on Mount Nemo. So we will be circulating to you the information on how to do that. It may even get put in the chat. It may have been put in the chat already. I've lost track. You'll see here some dates. These are the dates when there'll be cross-examination, as Judy and Gord have mentioned. Hearing the submissions from the experts for Nelson is interesting, but it's more interesting on cross-examination. And it will be interesting, more interesting to you when our experts present. The hearing schedule is a bit of a moving target, but if you want to put in your calendar April 3rd, 8th, and 9th, that's when we're expecting cross-examination on the issue in natural heritage. Really, that's code for Jefferson salamander. The blasting information that David talked about, the blasting experts and the cross-examination is scheduled for April 16th and 17th. As the testimony and the cross-examination occurs, there are, occasional shifts in the schedule, and we will send out bulletins to you saying, tune in today, today's a good day to watch. So that's the first thing that you can do. Secondly, there's I think we're going to put a link in the chat for you. There's a one of these click and send messages that you can send to Doug Ford, to the MPP for Milton Z. Hamid, and to the new Minister of Natural Resources, Mike Harris Jr. And that message says, calls for moratorium, brings attention to Mount Nemo, says we're watching, and you should be watching as well. So I'm watching the chat to see if a link gets put in there, because I can't remember if that's how we're doing it or not. Yes, there it is. So you could click on that link right now if you wanted to, or you could open it in your tab and fill in your letter after this meeting ends in 10 minutes or so. And we will again be sending this out to you via email if it doesn't work for you to do it now, or if you want to do it later. And we encourage you to share this letter with your neighbors and friends to raise the profile communities. The province of Ontario, the Ford government, has essentially abandoned communities to be on their own. I hear all the time from people in communities, why do I have to raise money to fight a government that is supposed to be protecting me and my family and my community? Why do I have to do that? This is a fundamentally unjust system. We agree with that. We're bringing attention to all of that. These are the issues we want to bring together during the course of the Nelson hearing. One of the things that we've said when we travel around to different communities, and often people do feel isolated and alone. And we've discovered that a very powerful message that we can say to people is, you are not alone. You are not in this alone. There are others. We're all in this together. We are not alone. And I want to connect it to the backyard comment, if you will, for a second, that not in my backyard. The climate crisis, which is more and more visible every day, is making it clear that all of our backyards connected. The climate crisis as a global phenomena is very, very hard to fight. It's very hard for any of us in our own communities to think, what do I do about climate change? Well, the thing you can do about climate change is protect your community, is to protect your backyard, to protect the environment and the farmland and the food and the water that is where you live. And in protecting that in your community, in your backyard, and protecting it with others in their backyards, in as many places as we can, that's how we're going to contend with, mitigate, survive the climate crisis. You've been very generous with your attention. Again, I know Zoom can be very challenging. It's kind of a one-way communication. Thank you, Gord Pinard. Thank you, David Donnelly. Thank you, Judy Smelko, for your presentations tonight. Thank you, everybody, for your attention, for all of you and you who are working to protect the health and safety of your community. Thank you for working together. Thank you for being with us here tonight.
If they blow a hole in my backyard, everyone is gonna